Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this new video in which we continue our close reading of Dialectic of Enlightenment by Theodor, Adorno and Horkheimer. Today we're gonna start reading from the last chapter of the book entitled Notes and Sketches. Now this chapter is all a bundle of notes and extracts from papers by Horkheimer that are posthumous. If you remember in the afterword by Noerr, the editor of this edition of the book, he said that each chapter was written by one of the two and the other made some contributions to it, but as we went through the chapters, I kept saying Adorno and Horkheimer because it was just simpler. But for this chapter, it was all done by Horkheimer, apparently. But I would still say, Adorno and Horkheimer for the sake of, coherence and continuity. And as I said, these are just notes and extracts from Horkheimer papers that were probably going to be included in the book, but were not, so they just added them together in a random way at the end. And also the notes and sketches in the book Dialectic of Enlightenment are only half of the notes and sketches that were collected in Horkheimer's works. The other half has been published in the complete works of Horkheimer. So these are basically fragments, which is appropriate for the book. Remember, the main thesis is that Enlightenment went wrong because it's a philosophy that tries to build a coherent system. So a chapter that is just, fragments fit the purpose of the book, which was, if you remember, subtitled Philosophical Fragments. Like the whole point of the book is to be read as fragments. So each chapter is itself a fragment, but the other chapters were at least coherent within themselves. And as much as I'd like to keep that spirit alive in my videos, I think that going through the notes in a linear and disconnected way can be annoying. So I decided to rearrange the notes in a way that would make some sort of coherence, some sort of continuity between the ideas. And so each chapter of the next videos covering the notes and sketches will be covering a fragment from the notes and sketches. So I'm going to do 5 videos, with each video covering a part of the thesis that I think can be made by rearranging the fragments. And so what this chapter is actually saying, the notes and sketches, it's basically, giving us a theory of how you get fascism. What are the ingredients needed to end up with a fascist state? And so the first note we will read is going to be the longest one, and it will have this whole video for it. It's entitled Man and Beast, and it's because the first step to understand fascism is how humans treat animals. And from there we will get to the second video, which is about the stupidity of cleverness, which is related to how we treat animals. And then the third video will cover the fragments about isolation and media manipulation, which is the consequences of this stupidity that we just mentioned. Then the fourth video is about the terror that fascism unleashes, and then the fifth video is about the role of philosophy in all of this mess. Like, what should philosophy do to bring a free and equal society? Alright then, so let's start with the first fragment, Man and Beast. So as I said, this is the longest fragment. It goes for about 8 pages, and it's about the relationship between human beings and animals, which is essential to understand how fascist ideology works. Now, human beings have always identified themselves in contrast to animals. Human beings have reason and animals don't. And it is because we have reason that we are not just different from animals, but also superior to animals. Throughout European history, the idea of the human being has been expressed in contradistinction to the animal. The latter's lack of reason is the proof of human dignity. So this antithesis between human and animal is at the foundation of Western civilization, from antiquity all the way down to the modern day. In the modern day, which is, the times of Adorno and Horkheimer, there were philosophical and psychological movements that, on the surface, they seem to deny this antithesis, that human beings are not different from animals. And here the authors have in mind behaviorism. It's a psychological movement that argues that human beings are like animals, that they can be conditioned through positive or negative reinforcement. Just like we can train a dog to know when to get food, where to shit, when to sit, when to roll over, we can also train a human being to adopt the behavior that we want them to adopt. So again, this looks like a denial of the antithesis between man and beast, because it denies the role of reason in shaping human behavior. The fact that human beings have reason was theorized as the proof of their freedom, that as long as man uses reason, they cannot be the slave of their instinct or conditioning like animals. You can try to control someone's body all you want through pleasure and pain, but you cannot control their reason, right? Well, according to Adorno and Horkheimer, we actually understood the problem in the wrong way. Behaviorists are not denying human superiority in reason. On the contrary, they are acknowledging it as the proof of freedom still. The difference is what behaviorists mean by freedom. To be free, for the behaviorists, is to be willing to be conditioned. What reason does is give consent to one's own conditioning, something that an animal cannot do. By mistreating animals, they announce that they, and only they in the whole creation, function voluntarily in the same mechanical, blind, automatic way as the twitching movements of the bound victims made use of by the expert. So they mean by this that we are, like the dissected frogs in labs whose limbs twitch automatically. The expert, the science professor dissecting the frog says that those twitches are reflexes. They are movements that happen independently of reason. And it is also worth noting the comparison the authors draw between the professor of his time and the soothsayer of antiquity. They say the professor at the dissection table defines such movements scientifically as reflexes. The soothsayer at the altar would have proclaimed them a sign from his gods. Like in both cases, the agency of the individual is denied. In the former, it is just reflexes. In the latter, it is gods. At the end of the day, we are firstly not through with superstition, and the professor is believing in the same myth the same myth as the soothsayer, that we are devoid of agency. Something else is controlling us. But what we have on top of animals is that we can be willing to be dissected frogs. Reason isn't freedom from the path that is imposed on us, but can only be its acceptance. The animal, they say, has only unreasoning terror. The animal simply tries to flee away from the dangerous path, but the animal can't. He is trapped, and yet it still tries desperately to escape, which only makes its fate more painful. We, however, humans, because we have reason, we can accept that there is no way out of the path in which we are. And so this is what reason is for enlightenment, and this is what human dignity consists in. Humans possess reason, which pitilessly follows its path. So reason becomes even unreflective about itself, and as such reason becomes devoid of reason. It becomes to be seen as yet just another limb that follows its course, just like any other limb of the dissected frog that twitches. It simply responds mindlessly to a stimulus. So the mind becomes mindless. The mind becomes just a limb that responds to stimulus without thinking about it. So reason becomes a tool to justify why some have to be subjugated to the worst treatments ever. Those deemed lacking in reason have no other choice but to suffer the fate that falls on them. Like we've seen with bodies, like we will see with bodies in another fragment, the division between body on the one hand and soul on the other gave the legitimacy for the latter, for the soul, to rule over the former, the body. So to the natural world, this divide is then transposed. You have animals, earth, planets on the one hand, and then you have the human beings on the other. You have the body, and the body is nature, animals, the planet, and humans, it's the soul. And so the former lacks reason, and the latter has reason. The unreasoning creature has always suffered at the hands of reason. So whatever doesn't reason must lead the life of an animal and gets treated like an animal, meaning that they are regarded as nothing more than creatures of impulses, incapable of self-governing. To be able to self-govern means that you resist impulses. You cannot throw away an important duty because you have the impulse of staying in bed all day, for example, or because you want to seek pleasure. That's why reactionaries have this belief that some people are capable of self-governance while others don't. And so it is pointless for the former to try to help the latter. It is useless to invent, for example, universal healthcare, because those rely on institutions that, in order to be maintained, they require the self-governance of people. But since those who benefit from healthcare cannot govern themselves because they simply think in terms of impulses, those institutions will eventually crumble. And so the weak, unable to control their impulses, well, they must be left to die. And so in contrast, the strong are capable of, suppressing their bodies, and so to suppress their impulses. So in the end, you have either you control your own body or let someone else control it in your place. And so in both cases, the body must die, or the body must die, or the body kills you. And so even reason, as we said, is turned into a body as well. So the project of fascism is to turn reason into a machine that controls another machine. Mind and body become super machines that control machines. And so this is psychology's job. It is to turn the soul in human beings, their psyche, into the perfect machine to control the other machine, which is the body. And here Adorno and Horkheimer bring a contrast between psychology applied to human beings and animal psychology. When it is to human beings, it makes human regressive and destroy their sense of self. Psychology turns reason into a thing to be studied, like any other material object. And so this means that reason, which was sought to emancipate people from their limits, is now turned against them. It only reaffirms the limits, which grow only narrower. And so the range of possibility of experience, the creation of meaning, etc., is just reduced further still. And so reason now provides none of that. It provides no imagination, no meaning, none of that. It just insists on the necessity to conform to the social order, to be like everyone else, to think like everyone else, to behave like everyone else, to eat, speak, drink, etc., just like anybody else. And when it comes to animal psychology, it's worse, because here they argue there is no psyche anymore. Psychology literally means the study of the soul. Psyche in Greek means soul, psyche. But animals don't have souls, and therefore psychology is more ruthless with animals. So we see a regression. The soul of man is turned into a body through psychology, and by extension, animals have lost all rights to a soul. They even mention Aristotle, who attributed a soul to them, if an inferior one, but preferred to speak of the bodies, parts, movements, and procreation of animals rather than the life peculiar to them. So, by reducing everything to just matter, we arrive at a situation in which concepts no longer exist. The animal kingdom has only bodies, no concepts. And so the point of a concept in philosophy is to grasp something and, in some sense, immortalize it. Like reason is precisely what generates concepts. Words and representations had a political utility, which is that they make things valuable. By calling the concept of a dog, for example, dogs can be seen as more than just, body parts, more than just flesh and blood, but they are, they have something peculiar in them that makes them dogs. So they become to have an identity, something that precisely resists the ongoing flux of matter. When everything, changes without the appeal of concepts, then everything loses their identity or their individuality, and therefore everything kind of remains the same while everything is in flux. So you don't have something that can preserve who you are, that can, distinguish you within the melting pot that is, matter. There is nothing in the flux that could be defined as lasting, and yet everything remains one and the same, because there is no fixed knowledge of the past and no clear prospect into the future. And so it's interesting that in the 1944 version, flux the term flux replaced the term transience, which means the fact of lasting only a short amount of time. So that change may suggest that the violence of sameness, that things don't even last for a short amount of time, but they disappear the second that they appear. Like, in transience, at least, you have a small amount of time before, you disappear again. But with the word flux, it's like, even that small amount of time is no longer allowed. And it is ironic because this is taken to mean progress. Like from antiquity, philosophers have been distrustful of flux, the idea that everything is changing. For them, radical material change meant that nothing has value, that everything is the same and nothing is distinguishable from anything else. And so from Plato onwards, without getting into too much details, of course, the role of metaphysics was to establish something that resists the flow of time, that something can last. And so the world of forms, the souls, and other metaphysical entities had at least this advantage, even though they too played a role in the consolidation of power. They tried at least to save the concept. Like, true, their error was that they made metaphysical concept detached from the material world, and therefore they saved only an empty shell. It's like, religion that tries its best to save the belief, but not those who are suffering, right? Kind of like Mother Teresa. Like, she was just, more concerned with converting people than actually, bringing medicine to people with diseases. Like, they worry more about whether or not the belief in God is safe, rather than alleviating actual suffering, or curing actual diseases, or guaranteeing rights and needs of people. No, what they worry about was the belief, and they let those who need medicine, who need assistance, they leave those to their demise. So you can argue that philosophers kind of did the same with concepts. They were saving the empty shells instead of, the shell's substance. A concept like freedom, for example, isn't just a form devoid of people having rights over their movements, bodies, and associations. It serves the actual people who need freedom. It needs to be substantive. So names are precisely what gives us consistency and substance. And so without them, we are like everything else. In constant flux, everything stays the same. But that was deemed superstitious by progress. And so with Enlightenment, from its nominalism to positivism, even the faculty of making concepts, reason itself becomes just another limb. And so recognition is just a vital pattern now. To give a name to someone or some animal or a thing, it is the same as the eye generating an image, the ear a sound, the nose a smell, the skin a touch, and the tongue a taste. As they write, the animal responds to its name and has no self. It is enclosed in itself, yet exposed. One compulsion is followed by another. No idea extends beyond it. And so the name is reduced to just that, a stimuli, something we respond to, like a sound or an image or a smell. It has no meaning beyond the response that it causes, just like in a chemical reaction. And so the fate of the animal during Enlightenment reveals much about this. They were deprived of their agency to the point where some even asserted that they don't feel fear or pain. And so this is called Cartesian reductionism. Like Descartes hypothesized that animals don't actually feel pain or feel fear because they have no awareness. They're literally like machines. They can scream and shout, but they have no awareness of what is happening because they lack reason. And therefore pain is nothing to animals. It's literally nothing more than a chemical reaction. The body reacts, but the mind isn't there. Exactly like, the state of amnesia that we will also going to mention in another fragment about progress. So the point of concepts is precisely to make us, remember what was recognized at first. When I see a pattern, when I see, resemblance in the word, I make a concept. And so the concept tree, for example, means that I saw an object once, and I saw it again another time, and again and again and again, and I noticed that some are different from others, but they have fundamental similarities. They all have branches, trunks, and leaves, so I come to call all of them by the same name, tree. But that means that I have to remember those features, and therefore all the time that I encounter trees, right? If I see a tree, then the moment I don't see it, like it disappears from my mind, but the next time I'll see it, because I forgot about the first one, I won't be able to form a concept. So if we say that animals are like that they forget that quickly, then they don't have a mind. and that justifies everything that we can do to them. Their inability to form concepts means an ability to recognize happiness, for example. And you cannot complain that you are being mistreated badly if you can neither remember the mistreatment or don't know what happiness is, right? For happiness to become substantial, for life to be endowed with death, identifying remembrance is needed. Assuaging knowledge, the religious or philosophical idea, in short, the concept. So animals have no tools to remember anything that happens to them, or at least this is how Enlightenment thinks about animals, according to Adorno and Horkheimer. They don't even have language, so who cares what happens to them? They have, like, the whole utility of animals is to die serving progress. So it's already fucked up concerning animals, but imagine what happens when we apply this to every sentient being. Everything ends up living inside, Schopenhauer's pendulum. For Schopenhauer, life is like a pendulum that swings from boredom to pain. When you get a desire, you are in pain because you crave what you don't have, but once you fulfill it, you are bored, and so another desire emerges, and so on and so forth. And so this is the life of an animal, according to Adorno and Horkheimer. The life of an animal is a series of moments between sated impulses and endless craving. And so they remain in that state forever, like in a dream, or more precisely, a nightmare. For most of philosophy, human beings saw in reason the way out of this nightmare. They theorized that reality isn't just the opposite of dream, but it's the opposite of a nightmare. Being in a dream wasn't good like we often portray it today. Reality wasn't better in dreams. It's actually worse in dreams. Dreams are always nightmares because you have no control, no agency over what's happening. And so the idea that in dreams we have control is also a recent one. Like, in other words, reality is better than dreams, and reason gives us the ability to wake up from the dream, to break from the nightmare, the pendulum of desire and pain. And so that's why, as they point in the fairy tales, when humans are transformed into animals, it's always bad news. It's not something good. When a human being is turned into a bird, for example. In mythology and in fairy tales, it's not something to be celebrated, but it's not the human being is finally going to achieve freedom. No, it's actually worse. He is being more imprisoned. Like, to become an animal was always a punishment, even for those who believed in metempsychosis, like that's the transmigration of the soul, when the soul gets reincarnated into animals. For many religions, that was seen as a downgrade. When you get reincarnated as an animal, it's a downgrade, it's a punishment. And so this is probably a fear to regress to primeval times, where human beings were completely at the mercy of nature. The animal reminds them of that nightmare, to be completely incapable of controlling your body and impulses. And so to have reason means to be able to break from the spell, to awaken to a reality in which man has agency over himself and the world. But that agency is translated as domination. Like man must go out there and conquer what he finds. The man must go out into hostile life, must act and strive. So the asterisk there refers to a poem by the German poet Friedrich Schiller. The poem is The Song of the Bell. It's about, the making of a church bell, which symbolizes the Liberty Bell of Philadelphia in the United States. So long story short, Schiller wrote the poem in 1799, so during the Napoleon Wars. What he wanted was for Germany to become a republic, and for that Germany needs a revolution like the American Revolution instead of the French Revolution, which would be, a revolution about real freedom. So he takes the bell as a metaphor for how to make a republican state. He describes the process of forging a bell, then he uses that process as a metaphor for the development of life and the development of individuals and citizens. So we must be forged as individuals in the same way as we forge a bell with technical skills. Not everyone can forge a bell. You need blacksmiths and artisans, people with the right knowledge and skills. And so the same is true to run a state. You cannot have democracy because in a democracy everyone can rule. Then he explains that he explains what went wrong with the French revolutions, with the French Revolution, and why tyrants have taken power. And then he gives his own understanding of how to make revolutions successful. And so basically you need God, according to Schiller, and people must be like God. They must be like creators. We must create the social world like God creates the natural world. And of course everyone has its assigned role in this process of creation. Men and women have different roles in this. The man must go out into the wild and tame the wild. And so the lines alluded to by Adorno and Horkheimer come from the 9th stanza of the poem, and it's from its 5th line. The man must go out in hostile life living, be working and striving, and planting and making, and scheming and taking, through hazard and daring, his fortune ensnaring. So Adorno and Horkheimer paint this contrast between the man who goes into hostile life, where he strives and conquers, where he schemes and takes, while the woman is given the task of being gentle and caring. Like the woman has the charge of caring for what's being tamed by the man. And so the man hunts down the animal, and the woman tends to them and heals them. For the being endowed with reason, however, concern for the unreasoning animal is idle. Western civilization has left that to women. They have no autonomous share in the capabilities which gave rise to this civilization. So that this task, of being gentle and caring for the animals was given to women, which first it paints a hierarchy of the tasks. The task of man that hunts and tames is more valuable than that of the woman. Like the woman has no say in how to make civilization. The job of caring is done just to reinforce the power of men. It's like someone who is running after you to pick up the pieces of what you have broken, but they can never tell you, what the fuck, dude? In other words, the division of labor also means a division of emotional labor. Men can do the harshest things to nature and be like, it's okay, the woman will take care of this. And this care is, of course, directed at the men as well, and to the means of production, as well as the production itself that was made by men. Women have been limited to the household so that they can give the care that they possibly can to the man and what the man produces. So she must tend to his axe, she must tend to his arrows and sword, she must be gentle with him, because the last thing a man who's been killing animals all day needs is a nagging woman. So care and concern have therefore been integrated within the patriarchal system. It serves nothing but the man's will to domination. And so, in short, the woman isn't a subject. She's not a producer. She's not even a huntress. She just looks after the producer and his tools for his dominance. And so she herself was tamed, becoming an image of nature itself. So nature was hostile to man, and so man turned nature into a hunting playground to submit her to his will. All forces of nature have been, redirected from their purpose to serve man's purpose. So the earth, the flesh of animals, the plants, the weather, all must be rearranged so that they automatically serve men. And so the victory over women also symbolized that victory over nature. Like animals, women too were seemed inferior and therefore deserved to serve their masters. And so animals lacked reason, which gives legitimacy to men, legitimacy for men to rule over them. And women, when the patriarchy doesn't claim that they lack reason, they say that women lack strength. And so that is just another legitimization for women's subjugation. The suppression of women was justified on their biology. Being the weaker sex, they cannot go out in the fields they cannot go into the fields with men, but they must stay behind and serve them. When domination of nature is the true goal, biological inferiority remains the ultimate stigma, the weakness imprinted by nature, the mark which invites violence. So, all forms of institutions in male society have this goal, to dominate nature, and for that, everything associated with nature as irrational and lacking in reason, like emotions, are seen as a form of weakness. Animals are weak because they are irrational. They cannot figure out the traps set by man to capture them. They think in terms of immediate impulse, which makes them pretty vulnerable and thus inferior to man. And so the concern and care that women were assigned with, men are capable of care and concern as much as women, of course, but because it's a sign of weakness, men have assigned those to women. Whenever a man is emotional, it is weakness. And so that care was used to keep women inferior. And so the church went to the fullest with this. The church, which in the course of history has hardly missed an opportunity to take a leading voice in popular institutions, whether they be slavery, crusades, or simply pogroms, sided with Plato despite the Ave Maria in the assessment of women. Now, briefly about Plato, he is often portrayed as a misogynist and a lover of power, but it's more complicated than that. But it's true that many ideas of Plato were taken by the church to reinforce their power, but often there is a lot of distortion of what Plato actually said. Plato had an influence both on the actual church as much as Gnostic literature, which were followers of Jesus, the Gnostics. These were followers of Jesus that were more libertine and more equal and preached equality and celebrated sexuality. So keep that nuance in mind about Plato, but not all Gnostics, of course. Like, don't take this as a block. But anyway, so the fact is that the church sided with power despite the importance of Jesus's mother, the Ave Maria. We find again this repression of care in the form of a woman. The church justified slavery, crusades, and pogroms. It justified power over nature and used it on people as well. So power, in other words, takes what can disrupt it, any revolutionary potential, and turns it into something inoffensive, or turns it against itself. Revolutionary potential turns into a reactionary potential. So the potential of Mary, that's Ave Maria, and we can also mention, Mary Magdalene, who in the Gnostic literature played a major role and was considered Jesus's favorite disciple, but she was turned into a secondary figure whose care is simply directed towards the meek that the church oppresses. So she is reduced to a residue from a matriarchal times, and so the church tolerates it only because it can make it serve its purpose. The image of the Mother of Sorrows was a concession to matriarchal residues, yet the church used the very image which was supposed to redeem woman from her inferiority to sanction it. So there, what is supposed to redeem you from your inferiority, the revolutionary potential, is used to sanction your inferiority, to confirm it. And as such, the freedom of women would be like, as we said about healthcare, it will lead to decadence and degenerance. So Schiller already had this in his poem. He already compared women who get too much freedom to hyenas. If you base society on liberty and equality, like with the French Revolution, you won't like the consequences. Women will turn into wild and savage beasts when they should ideally personify the concept of grace. He said, "Then women to hyenas growing do make with horror gesture art, still quivering, panther's teeth employing, they rip apart the enemy's heart." And so Adorno and Horkheimer quote from the revolutionary Joseph de Maistre, which we already mentioned before, about what would happen if women were given freedom and equal status as men. The state will crumble, according to Le Maistre. There will be no rules, and we turn into savages. Like literally, for these people, to liberate women means to liberate nature, to give nature the superiority over civilization. Quote, "The influence of divine law in Christian land, proclaimed de Maistre, that laws legitimate son need only be extinguished or weakened to a certain degree by tolerating the freedom of women which has arisen from it, and freedom through noble and moving in itself will degenerate soon enough into shamelessness. Women should become the fatal instrument of a general decline which would swiftly undermine the vital organs of the state. Engulfed by corruption, the state would spread shame and terror in its fiery ruin. So we have the same theme as in Schiller. If you defy the divine law of God, who made men and women to serve each a different purpose in a harmonious hierarchy, then you will fall into chaos. Hence the paradoxical necessity to maintain the fear of women in the heart of men. To dominate something at this level, at least, you pretty damn sure are scared of it. Like Adorno and Horkheimer give the example of witch trials, which terrorized people and at the same time confirmed women's superiority. So the witch hunts rather confirmed how women were seen close to nature, that they are mimetic creatures. The witch with her spells and her transformations was associated with the devil. Magic, which can confer people freedom from oppression, like the authors have theorized, is associated with evil. So anything that can remind us of mimesis, of mana, and of magic must be feared. It must be called a superstition. And superstitions are man's failure to wake up from the nightmare. People who believe in ghosts and magic are, from the point of view of enlightenment, people who did not escape from nature's embrace. But the irony and the main thesis of Dialectic of Enlightenment is that calling everything that science cannot compute a superstition is itself a superstition. It is the same fear to regress towards nature that makes both the shaman, the priest, and the science professor accusing each other of superstition. So the point is, we didn't escape from nature. Enlightenment, the divine law of God, and all of that claims that we have escaped from nature, and that would legitimate the cost and the burdens they put on animals and people like slaves, workers, or women. But in reality, we didn't escape from it. We are still living in the state of nature because we are living with the principle of might makes right, of self-preservation. Nature has already triumphed over us. When the church burns the books of pagans, it claims that it has finally escaped the matrix, but they don't see how their autodafés, which means book burning, is the same as the bonfires of pagans. You didn't escape the matrix. You didn't escape superstitions. The autodafé were the church's pagan bonfires, a triumph of nature in the form of self-preserving reason, to the glory of reason's domination over nature. So the potential of women must be turned against them. Care, concern, femininity, and even beauty are given a place and office if they can contribute to their own subjugation. If later on women were given equal rights, it was only so that they can become equal to men as labor force to serve monopolies. So the right for women to vote and work was to increase the mass of muscles that can dominate and exploit nature even more. So if women want to have a place in the world of men, it's either as career for career in it's either as a career in the care of men, or a career as exploiters, just like men. So that's that's the choice given to women in male-dominated society. You either care for men as carer for men, or as exploiters, just like men. But of course, their inferior biology doesn't let them compete with men, so they don't have the same the necessary biological trait for that. So they are better left in the private home, tending for the kids in order to produce the next generation of exploiters. So what femininity can offer as revolutionary potential is appropriated by the patriarchy to reinforce it. The bourgeoisie reaped the benefit of feminine virtue and modesty as reaction for formations of the matriarchal rebellion. So a reaction formation is a defense mechanism in psychology. It's when you want something that you deem to be taboo, and so you change how you respond to it. Like a 40-year-old man who is attracted to teenage girls will become a conservative and promote chastity. You know, that's a reaction formation. And so here we have the same thing. The patriarchal bourgeoisie want that feminine virtue and modesty, but not out of matriarchal rebellion. And therefore it needs a way to keep it without its taboo. It turns those traits into not a trait for emancipation, but for subjugation. So their potential was giving legitimacy in a broken form, if you want. The fact that she has potential must be the proof of her defeat to male power and her devotion to male power. Subjugated, she mirrors her conqueror's victory in her spontaneous submission, reflecting defeat back to him as devotion, despair as the beautiful soul, the violated heart as the loving breast. So in exchange for her devotion and surrender, she is giving a sacred place. Women become holy figures when they accept to be vulnerable, to be defenseless, and to be fragile. It's only in being disrespected that women can find respect in patriarchal society, as proof, of their lord's goodwill and benevolence. So men, like in Schiller's poem, must mimic their creator in the social order. God only loves the meek, right? Then if men are the gods of the social world, they only love women if they are meek. Like nature only becomes a subject of contemplation to the romantic poet only after it is given to industrialism. Women became holy when they are at the mercy of men. So, as they say, at the price of radical exclusion from praxis and withdrawal into a charmed circle, nature receives homage from the Lord of creation. So the admiration that patriarchal society gives to women hides the underlying feeling of superiority, the scorn, the laughter, another thing with revolutionary potential turned into a conformist tool. The authors mention the role of jesters in the king courts who were, charged of making the king laugh by ridiculing themselves. So the jester is nature's gaiety tamed and broken. When the kings praise the jester's performance, behind that, admiration, they are celebrating their scorn and superiority over nature, and the obscenity that really praises the dominance of the potent over the impotent. So the role of the jester was giving to women. This allows men to hide their actual fear from women, which in reality is a fear from nature, fear from death and impotence. This is the reaction formation we talked about. Men feel impotent in nature, so they try to hide that fear by claiming that they are not impotent, and they prove it by making something else impotent. And therefore, everything that can be an obstacle to men's potency over nature is sublimated into an offensive form, is excluded from praxis and trapped within a charmed circle, just like women. Art, morality, and love are all like women. They are irrational, and therefore they are the masks of nature. Whenever you see them, the patriarchy says that's nature in disguise, and so they must be transformed to become nature's own antithesis. Art serves the capital cultural of the bourgeoisie or the culture industry. Morality and sublime love become stifling tools of oppression, etc. So the aspects of nature are distorted into tools to maintain civilization. And so these masks, as they say, give nature the gift of speech, and by that nature becomes something out of nature. It becomes civilization. Through speech, human beings can emancipate themselves from the natural world and dominate it. So if nature has speech, it has already been defeated by civilization. It has made itself into the trickster, into the witch, and so when beauty was given its mask, it received speech, and at that moment it became the devil, it became the serpent. Beauty is the serpent which displays the wound where once the fang was implanted. So the serpent is beauty using speech to bring back human beings to the state where wild beasts dominate them. So if nature speaks, it only reveals itself as tricking human beings into becoming prey. So if nature tries to speak, it's game over for her. if the gesture, it is the gesture that must not be taken seriously. Its power of persuasion is imputed once the snake becomes the jester. The woman, therefore, is the jester of the man. Her very existence betrays her wicked intentions, like the snake's speech betrays his intentions of bringing back man to the state of nature, to bring man out of the Garden of Eden. So speech was already nature in a domesticated form, and women were forced to take up that task to the point of internalizing it. It's a process of sanitizing and purifying women from nature. Modern puritanical women zealously took up the task, identifying herself fully with the fait accompli, with nature not in its wildest, but in its domestication. So the authors show the progression in civilization. In ancient Rome, slaves gathered in bacchanals, parties for the honor of Bacchus, the Roman equivalent of the Dionysus, and in there, women would sing and dance, and they would have orgies. And so those gatherings were problematic for those in power. So slowly they began to be integrated into their culture and system of dominance. And so slowly those gatherings lost their potency and their danger and were converted into Victorian gender roles. What was left of the fans, songs, and dances of Roman slave girls was definitively reduced in Birmingham to piano playing and other handicrafts, until the last residues of female wantonness had been entirely sublimated as emblems of patriarchal civilization. So the spirit of those slave girls in Roman bacchanals was appropriated by the culture industry in the 20th century through advertisement. Women can have a sense of that freedom and that danger, the danger that they can pose to the patriarchal norms of ancient Rome through buying lipstick, through buying powder, skincare product, and bath suits. The system is like, so you want freedom? Here it is, buy it. You can buy freedom through me, so no need to make a fuss. You want love? Well, here's the perfect model for you. A handsome white boy who provides for you while you can spend all your time taking care of him and of yourself to be pretty for him. Oh, you don't like it? It puts too much pressure? Well, you just want to have sex and enjoy yourself? Well, there is porn. So everything that can be a threat to the system of domination is given a version compatible with that system. Nothing can escape it. Even promiscuity through the porn industry and sex models in magazines make sex a tool for oppression, or how the Nazis promoted sexuality in order to conform even more to their to confirm even more their domination. We already mentioned this in the concept of enlightenment and in the culture industry. The force of nature that was represented by the female is still daunting in bourgeois society, which has a love-hate relationship with bodies. So women were often seen as hysterical, as unreasoning force to be reckoned with, and so what society tries to undermine is this force. And it's force that has been around for ages, and it is on it that civilization has built itself. And that force, when it makes a comeback, it must be utilized for conquest. Jutting into the present like a fossil of the bourgeois esteem for women is the termagant, the shrew. And so this is an interesting sentence. Jutting means to extend, and the termagant, or the termagant, I think that's how it is pronounced, extends into the present. The termagant, or the termagant, I'm gonna say termagant, is a deity that is very turbulent. And fun fact, it was actually a god that the Christians in the Middle Ages thought Muslims were worshipping. But it is also a term for violent woman, or a nagging woman. That's what a shrew is. When you call a woman termagant, it means that she is ill-tempered, she's not, being ladylike, and shrew means nagging. So in the present of Adorno and Horkheimer, the termagant makes a comeback like a fossil of the bourgeois esteem for women. So the women are the termagant, and that inspires both awe and fear in the heart of men. So being a shrew, her nagging offers a terrifying force against the husband who wants to control her sex in the household. When you don't kneel in front of her to worship her, she knocks off that hat. She knocks off your hat. A woman who knocks off the hat of a man was a big deal back then. It symbolizes the hat that falls down. It symbolizes a head that rolled off. That the head itself must roll, come what may. She has always demanded in politics, whether in reminiscence of the Menadic past or through outbiding man and his order in her impotent rage. So the Menadic past refers to Menads, who in Greek mythology were the female followers of Dionysus. We will return to them. The point is that the Menad is a fossil, meaning that this feeling is deeply rooted in civilization. The bourgeois order needs to always see women as such, as a threat, and like a threat that they cannot take away. They need to turn that turbulence, they need to sublimate it into their own war effort. It's good here to compare with the 1944 version, where you had a different sentence. The present has an asterisk. When you look at the footnote, you read the fascist present, in which she no longer needs, metaphorically, to put on mannish trousers because she is already in desexualized slacks machining bombs. So in this version, women are machining bombs in the fascist present. So that's a reference to women who replaced men in factories to produce the weapons, while the men were at the front during World War II. So it's very interesting to put these two in perspective, where the return of the fossil of the termagant, the violent, mannish, and ill-tempered woman, with making bombs in factories. Like the violence of women had to be desexualized. We take away the sexuality of women so that their violence is directed towards the war effort. In other words, women had to become men if they were to maintain their violence. She no longer needs the mannish trousers because she was already in desexualized slacks. Her sexuality was denied, and that's why she can take on the role of man in factories. So women can do what men do. So women can do what men do as well, and that meant that women must act like men. They must be ruthless like men. They must have the same goals as men. They must conquer. They must wage wars, etc. And this is interesting when you consider what the authors are saying next. They argue that the violence of women eclipses that of men. And to use again the example of the bacchanals, when women, the Menads, were in a frenzy during those parties for Dionysus, they can become strong enough to dismember bowls with their bare hands. Like these Menads were terrorizing men. In Greek mythology, Menads have killed heroes. Orpheus, for example, the legendary poet, was dismembered by Menads. And in the play The Bacchae by Euripides, Agave, the queen of the Menads, dismembered her own son Pentheus when she was, in a frenzy, when she was, dancing for the glory of Dionysus. And so Adorno and Horkheimer also mention the image of the Fury, the goddess of vengeance that wrecks the shit of people. The anger of women was reminiscent of the wrath of nature. So their anger causes more damage than men's anger. The bloodthirstiness of women in pogroms eclipses that of men. So, if the image of women as caring and nurturing is true, they can also be more violent than men. Because of that, women's force had to be contained. But how can you contain it? Well, the oppressed woman, as they say, keeps a grimace on her face which reminds men of a mutilated nature that is not having it. The grimace, which is the scar that, nature has suffered by the action of men, signals that the walls of civilization can break at any moment. So the goal of civilization is to make that grimace disappear, to make women content with their situation. You know, when you are frowning and a guy tells you you should smile more, like for the authors, grimaces, those are marks of mutilation in patriarchal society, and these must not be ugly. Ugliness represents discontent. The frown means that we are not happy with this situation, and so cultural mass production seeks to force you into conformity, to finally get the bored woman to finally be happy, so that she doesn't, unleash her anger. And so in such situations, the nagging and the scolding of the shrew, the ill temper of the termagant, according to the authors, becomes a sign of humanity, her ugliness a trace of spirit. So civilization tries to eradicate that grimace through uniformity. It tries to model both bodies of both sexes into a singular unified model where both serve the same purpose. It tries to accommodate them both to the status quo. Both sexes would contribute to the same cultural production. That's the American way of life. The melancholy of women signified their subjugation, and so as long as women were showing traits of melancholy, they were making a grimace. They were a danger to the system. And so you can think of today how we are so afraid of melancholy and of pessimism. We are forced to always put on a smile and be happy, right? But given that the advertisement of buy the washing machine or the vacuum cleaner and you'll make your wife happy isn't turning that frown upside down, the culture industry had to do with it and give them a simulation of what they want. Here the authors make a comparison between the figure of the young girl who displays her alienation and the modern Haridan, meaning a strict and bullying old woman, or in their words, a social hyena, maybe a reference to Schiller here. They argue that the Haridan tries to pursue cultural goals. She is fierce and has ambition. It is the woman who wants to be the boss. She is after honor and publicity, but as we said, this is the woman who works in the factory to make bullets. She is a woman who is entering into an arena dominated by men who think that she will be prettier if she smiled. And so they write, her understanding of male culture is not yet sufficiently sharpened to prevent her amid the injuries done her from committing faux pas and showing that she is not yet at home in the civilization of men. So I mean, men already have difficulty showing that they are at home in the civilization of men, yet alone women. So being unable to prove that she is at home in the civilization of men, the culture industry offers her the simulation of the civilization of women. She turns to spirituality, for example, or New Age paganism. She gets into meditation, into Neo-Buddhism, mischief like tarot and astrology. And they add that she gets into a mixture of a bit of science and of magic. A strange mixture, by the way. The authors call her a misbegotten offspring of the idealistic privy councillor and the Nordic clairvoyance. So the Privy Council is a body of advisors to the royal family in Britain. They still exist today, and here it means that women are like advisors of power, like they work for power. They still take care of the patriarchy. Their job, even if it is outside their household, is to attend to the needs of the patriarchy. Even if they are at the top of the hierarchy, women have to make sure that the hierarchy in question is still a patriarchal one. And so their shortcoming in power, since they cannot have their place in a male-dominated society, is compensated with their interest in clairvoyance and exotic beliefs and magical practice. Like those activities surrounding mischief and spirituality and sorcery are more things for her personal enjoyment rather than revolutionary tools. It's more of a personal therapy, some sort of, concession that male power allows women to have. It's kind of like, saying have your little hobby of hippie bullshit. We'll tolerate it as long as you don't bring it in politics, as long as your little magic spells don't challenge our power. So you have a mixture of science and magic, of church and royal power with paganism, which of course annuls any potential for social change and challenge to the patriarchy. As they write, the last female opposition to the spirit of male society is degenerating into a morass of trivial rackets, sects, and hobbies, is turning into the perverted aggression of social work and theosophical gossip, venting its pretty rancor in good works and Christian science. Like, in other words, the things that can have a political impact towards emancipation are turned into individualistic pleasures and antisocial behavior, which in the end serves the interests of the rackets. To go back to animals, the solidarity we can have with non-human creatures becomes more of a lifestyle rather than, actual action. The authors say that solidarity towards animals is conveyed through New Age spirituality and by selective breeding. In this quagmire, solidarity which creaturely life expresses itself not so much in the Animal Protection League as in Neo-Buddhism and the Pekingese, whose distorted visage now, as in early paintings, reminds us of the physiognomy of the court jester left behind by progress. Okay, so philosophies like Neo-Buddhism replaces actual action. It replaces the Animal Protection League. Instead of acting towards the well-being of animals and nature, people just confess their belief and adherence to a religion or a form of philosophy or spirituality. This is like you post something in solidarity with animals, but you never give a single penny to PETA, for example. Or when celebrities show their care for mistreated animals, but being close to they show themselves close to their Pekingese. Pekingese is an artificial breed of dog from China. It's a small dog with tiny legs, and it is very fluffy. It's the kind of dog that you see rich people often carry in their bags. And so it was popular in paintings at that time, and the authors compare its distorted face with the physiognomy of the jester, meaning the facial features of the jester once progress replaces him. Like, progress for Adorno and Horkheimer is progress in terms of social control. The jester represented some sort of control. He was a symbol of a mutilated nature, but still expressed a potential for resisting power. But once power found more efficient ways to consolidate itself, it threw the jester away. And so that's progress according to the authors. And so the Pekingese is the same thing. It is a further stage of the mutilation of nature, which marks the progress of science to the point where it can engineer bodies however it wants. And so it engineers bodies that do not, threaten the power of humans. So the scientific method found its peak when it can turn animals into Pekingese, inoffensive and harmless. It can produce them on command, and so everything is turned into a Pekingese. Everything goes through the same standard process to turn them into inoffensive and harmless versions of themselves. When animals are remembered, it's like for the jester during extinction. We are reminded of animals when their last specimens of the last species, as the medieval fool, perish in endless torment, a capital loss of their owner who was unable to provide the loyal creatures with fire protection in an age of concrete buildings. The tall giraffe and the wise elephant are oddities which can no longer provide amusement for wised-up schoolboys. So here they're talking about when animals appear in newspapers. They mention a story of animal dying in a circus fire, so that's the loss of their owner. And they also mention the poisoning of large animals, which are giving a small column in a journal. So the relationship with the jester is that once progress replaces him, then we care for just a moment, and then we forget about him. We either publish something to lament the loss, to the loss of the owner of the animal, but we don't really care about the animal per se. Or if we care a little bit, we publish some heartbreaking story about how we lost the jester, but it's more of a farewell, a thank you for your service, but we don't really need you anymore, rather than an actual recognition of what we just lost. So things like that happen when people who never give a shit about art suddenly feel indignation when it is vandalized. Their reaction is further proof that they consider art as obsolete, like animals. It's Like it is nice to preserve animal life, but no one is going really to act against destroying it. And so progress means remains the priority. So the colonial project of the 19th century, all the way to world wars, had this rationale for invading Africa: progress. That Africa was deemed a land of regress and without civilization wasn't entirely wrong for Adorno and Horkheimer. But when the proponents of progress saw in it the legitimacy of invading and forcing white Western civilization on Africa, the authors saw in Africa's resistance against civilization the spirit of emancipation. Like if progress led to the world wars, then those who are in regress are more humane and more advanced than their Western counterpart. That people from Africa lived in proximity with animals was an obstacle to progress, and that was a good thing, according to the authors. When progress came along, it wiped out those animals and that proximity between man and beast and put roads and highways for the circulation of weapons, bombs, and capital. And so cities are the Pekinization of nature, the transformation of nature into Pekingese. And so they are distortion of the landscape. So much so we have collaborated with this process, and so much we are unaware of it that it is happening right in front of us without any symbolic display. Our transformation is happening directly with no need to conceal it at all. And so after all, this transformation is all part of a rational process, and symbols are superstition, right? Even trying to understand rationality symbolically is risky for the power of reason. Reason is pushed to such extremes that it becomes direct without mediation. On an earth made reasonable, there is no longer a need for the aesthetic reflection. The demons are driven out by directly imprinting humans. Domination no longer needs numinous images, it produces them industrially, the more reliably to insinuate itself into human beings. And so what this passage means is that everything must become like a computer. When we say that symbols are a superstition, it is not that we cannot have symbols anymore, but that they are administered rationally, administered by the computer. So there is no need for aesthetic reflection, means that images and symbols cannot give way to reflection. When you try to preserve wildlife, it's because of an aesthetic reflection, not out of instrumental reasons. Animals are precious because of their beauty, for example, because there is something about the natural world that cannot be explained rationally, if you want. Progress, however, cannot understand why we can find reasons to privilege a lake and a river over a den or a forest over a shopping mall. And so aesthetic reasons are irrational for progress and must therefore be discarded. Again, it doesn't mean that progress doesn't let you enjoy the beauty of animals, rather it means that it is progress that decides on the production of that beauty and its meaning. Like with women who are allowed to have interests in magic and witchcraft, they can do so as long as it doesn't lead to aesthetic reflection. Aesthetic reflection means thinking differently about the world through feelings, emotions, imaginations, in short, thinking through other means than rationality and progress. So even numinous images, as we said, must be produced industrially. Magic and the beauty of animals must be sanctioned by the industry and not by animals. And therefore domination asserts itself completely in the lives of human beings. It decides on what human beings should believe, what they should think, how they should talk, walk, dress, eat, sleep, etc. Like a printer, it prints human beings. When everything that we are is produced by the process of standardization, domination becomes implemented into us, like we bear within us the code of domination. So demons and witches are driven out through the imprinting of human beings, means that human beings are stamped on a surface. We are forced to be a certain way and to hold specific beliefs deemed rational. Hence the tools for social control grow more potent. So the freedom of defying straight logic and rationality is strictly denied. To be able to think through emotions, through art, to think aesthetically or even morally for that regard is viewed as superstitious. And it allowed, and if it is allowed, it is limited to just personal stuff. Like, you're allowed to believe in magic as long as you keep it to yourself, like it's just an opinion. It has no political power whatsoever, and as such, ideas that can have potential to resist power are mutilated. They are either accused of superstition, or they must abstain from having any political impact. And so this is what is meant by mutilation. It's basically castration. You are driven to political impotence. So nature is mutilated in all of its aspects, in art, in feminine beauty, even in animals themselves, and so everything bears the distortion of the face of the Pekingese. The distortion, which is inherent in every work of art as mutilation, is inherent in the luster of feminine beauty, the maiming, which puts on show the wound in which subjugated nature recognizes itself. And this mutilation, as we said, grows direct, no longer with the help of mediation like in liberalism. In fascism, the distortion, the mutilation, is done directly through brute force, but it can also be done through more subtle way, through facts. The culture industry has, like science, its own precise external means of measurement by which to judge itself, facts. So what does it mean? Well, they argue that direct mutilation means not just physical direct violence, but also the inability to express that mutilation. It's not just that someone cuts you, but you cannot show the scar. You don't have any means anymore to express the distortion that you underwent. The direct violence is like, a rape victim who cannot file a police report about the rapist. They cannot show the damage done to them. And so art had that power to express the contradictions within society, the antagonism, the antinomies, that people don't have the same interests, that there is such thing as class struggle. So with art, people can show their scars. And totalitarian power doesn't want that. It seeks the perfect picture, no tears, no dark spots, everything in perfect harmony with everything. And for that, you cannot have means to express, means to literally bring out something from within. There is no within in totalitarianism, no possible interpretation, no deep emotions or thoughts or ideas. Everything is already on the surface. What is hidden can be a scar. It can be something that doesn't fit on the totalitarian painting, hence depth is denied. You cannot question things anymore because there is nothing to question. Everything is in plain sight, nothing is hidden. So what's the point of asking questions then? What is the point of having thought, an intellect, or even a language if it's not to be like, maybe there is more beneath the surface? As they say, but in earlier times such expression was called not only beauty but thought, intellect, language itself. Today language calculates, designates, betrays, initiates death, it does not express. So the role of language is reduced to just calculation, to designate, to bring things into the light and maintain them there. There cannot be a part of mystery anymore. By calculating and designating, language itself of, language instead, of acknowledging the depth and mystery of beings, well, it traps them. It gives them a fixed pseudo-identity from which they have no escape and in which they have no say. And so language betrays because it betrays your being. It should play the role of the ally to your complexity, to your hiddenness. Language is supposed to keep your secrets, if you want, but here language exposes you. It kills what makes you valuable and simply turns you into a corpse. It initiates death. That's what it means by not expressing. It denies the depth inherent in human beings or in any other being, and so it kills beings. It kills their experience. And it does this through the worship of facts. As we already explained in previous chapters, facts deny thought precisely because there is no arguing with facts. Whatever the psychological statistics say on the behavior of creatures, it must be the whole truth. So whatever the expert of the culture industry says must be true. They have numbers, they have, they know what kind of behavior works and which one doesn't, what behavior is more likely to bring progress, which one is more likely to bring in regress. Numbers don't lie, so that That's the cringe of the box offices that the cringe of the box offices is what makes profit margins. That means that whatever content is produced by monopolistic distribution, it must be true. That expert give the numbers of crimes committed by the poor means that the poor are wicked criminals. Point. There is no arguing with that. So whomever writes a novel or a painting depicting the injustices that the poor are undergoing, that, Jews in the time of Nazi Germany were suffering, that blacks, women, LGBTQ communities, third world population are dealing with discrimination, that the planet is dying, that, Palestinians are being mass murdered by Zionists, the experts say all of it is superstition. Our numbers don't show that systemic racism is a thing, for example, but it shows that most crimes committed are by minorities. All the talks of systemic oppression, that's just subjective expression. You just feel oppressed, but in reality you are not. You need to take responsibility for your actions and stop being a baby. So that's what it means that to use facts, to worship facts. And so such conservatism, this blind faith in rationality, makes it so that when cases of injustices appear, they are treated like accidents. Just like anti-Semitism and the word wars were seen as an anomaly, not as intrinsic feature of enlightenment. After all, there will always be people who get screwed over. It's just natural. It has nothing to do with our system. The system is great. It's computing everything. Maybe sometimes there is a bug somewhere, but overall it's a pretty damn good system. And so for the damned, their only way to survive is to show how their own distortion can serve the same power that caused them. Like anti-Semitism can only stop if the Jews made a rational case why they should be treated equally, when it is the same rationality that justifies anti-Semitism. Or homosexuals must show that their deviance can be rationally explained. It's a disease and diseases can be cured. Deviance can therefore only be forgiven if it serves the power that oppresses them. And so either by confirming that it is not a deviance through the means of that power, or present itself as a disease that can be cured by that power. So there is no possible reflection. For the ruled, it's always a rigged game. It's like tails I win, heads you lose. There is always only one option, period, and that is totalitarianism. Everything becomes one and the same, and so everything disappears. Along with the reflection of power by nature, the tragic, like the comic, has disappeared. The rulers become serious in proportion to the resistance to be overcome, and humorous in proportion to the despair they perceive. Intellectual enjoyment used to be confined to the presentation of suffering, but they play with horror instead. So this means that there is a reversal of concepts. When everything becomes one, the tragic and the comic disappear, means that they are no longer distinguished from one another. They both lead to the same thing, which is horror and despair. Normally, when words mean something, the tragic must be in response to the despair that the rulers see, right? Like rulers should be serious in proportion to the despair that they are perceiving. People are struggling, dying, etc. That should evoke seriousness from the rulers, but instead it induces humor and laughter. It just reinforces their power and their indifference. While they see that resisting such despair as a threat, they are serious against resistance. Resistance must be overcome, and so resistance becomes the tragic. You have a reversal of concepts. So in both cases, what is tragic and comic for the ruler amounts to the same thing: the further oppression of the oppressed, the reinforcement of power. Like when intellectuals, instead of presenting suffering, exposing its truth, they toy with horror. You can think of intellectuals of the genocide in Palestine as an example of how, instead of presenting the causes and speaking up against Israel, they go on talk shows just to sell their latest book or to make the comment that they are paid to tell. All the tools to counter power disappears, and only power remains. And so the same thing with sublime love, which at least conveys, strength to weakness. The weakness portrayed in female beauty, for example, was also a symbol of strength, which can also be a tool to counter male power and dominance. But instead, it's perverted into further affirming patriarchal power. The idol of today's society is the masculine face, which exhibits a certain rakish lordliness. The woman is used for work, childbearing, or if presentable, she enhances the status of her mate. No longer does she sweep the man away in rapture. Adoration reverts to self-love. So the adoration in question is the adoration that the man has for the woman. The strength that can be expressed through her weakness isn't to foster the adoration of the male towards the female and therefore to work towards equality between them, but it serves to reinforce the ego of the man. It reverts to self-love. The man loves himself, actually, and the strength that he perceives in female beauty becomes a strength to exploit for his own benefit. Everything must go to him while he has nothing to give. The word and its purposes demand the whole of man. None can give away any part of himself. He must keep it all within. And so in this worldview, there is a dichotomy between man and nature. Man is the within, while nature is the without. And from there, the within eats up the without, trying to integrate it within itself. So the without, therefore, is an object. It is a subordinate to the within. And so the point of praxis becomes the affirmation of that subordination. Practical thinking and action has only one goal, the integration of the without into the within. And so the authors use they use an analogy between the soldier and a girl in vulgar parlance to illustrate this. So parlance means a way of speaking. So you have the girl with vulgar way of speaking, that is like nature. It's the without that must be tamed by the within. And so the soldier represents order and the invading force that rapes the woman of the enemy. So any kind of relationship, social or physical, is therefore adapted into a relation of power. Love, friendship, kinship, whatever, you name it, it must serve power. Feeling confines itself to power in relation to power. And so at this rate, even men turn into women, into subordinate to power. What they do to women is also done to them, and by power. Like women who end up seeking that power, seeking that same power so much it is invasive, men also do the same. As they write, as women did earlier, man now lays down his arms before men, but his dark and swaggering coldness. He becomes a woman with eyes only for power. In the fascist collective, with its teams and work camps, everyone from tender youth is a prisoner in solidarity confinement, which breeds homosexuality. Even the beast must wear the lordly features. So in fascism, the relationship between men is patriarchal, with a man more with a man and men, like both of them have only eyes for power. Like men and women both have eyes for power, and so it is only one has power for being the dominated one, and the other for being the dominating. And so hence men have a sexual relationship with one another. Now, we already mentioned homosexuality in elements of anti-Semitism. So again, no need to go through it here. But to state it briefly, for the other, homosexuality is still understood in Freudian terms, meaning that it is associated with power. Like libido and power go always together in Freudian categories. So fascism breeds homosexuality, since it teaches those at the bottom, like we've seen in the fragment, like we will see in the fragment, interest in the body, to always crave for their subordination. Now, of course, this is outdated and it is wrong what they say about homosexuality, but they still see it through Freudian eyes. Like, prisoners must crave the power of their jailers, so men must lust for other men. And the reverse is also true. Like, men must dominate women, the libido, their lust for the female is dissociate from power and domination, so it is the same towards men. So fascism breeds homosexuality means that everything, including man-man relationship, must be a sort of BDSM relationship. Men cannot see each other as equals, but as ruler and ruled, and that power, that domination, is of course, in Freudian terms, it comes from the libido. It's a sexual power. So you need to have a sub and a dom, one that kills and another that gets killed. So in this sense, even homosexuality, which can be a counterpower to the patriarchal nature of fascist society, is actually incorporated within the system of dominance and is now calling for homicide. Like, even in the fascist collective, the fascists must express dominance over one another. Feelings of belonging, of affinity and equality among peers cannot exist. For them, as guards, must be prisoners, monads, as we will see with another fragment about criminals. Like the guard, like the prisoner, the dom, like the sub, are the same. They are both dehumanized, they are isolated in solitary confinement. So even the Hitlerian youth, the camps for the young boys, must see themselves in that way. They must compete with one another, trying to subjugate their fellow men. It's in this sense that homosexuality is bred. Hate what you love and love what you hate. So the homosexual relationship in fascism is another analogy for the relationship between man and nature. The oppressed is caricatured, has his feature exaggerated as to remind us of the ape, of the state of nature. The caricature of the Jew has always relied on this, and even Goethe's aversion to apes marked on the limits of his humanity. So the same nature that the fascist loves is the same nature that he hates. He has both attraction and aversion to it. This dual relationship calls for murder. The lion is glorified because he can kill the ape and rip it apart. Hence it is murdering animals that are the favorite of fascist leaders. Predators never praise, like the prey bears the mark of its weakness. The grimace of the ape means that it is weak, a prey, whereas the perfect body of the lion means that you cannot see any scars on it. Like, the animal is made to inflict the scar and the other to receive it. They say when captains of industry and fascist leaders have animals around them, they are not domestic puddles but Great Danes and lion cubs. They are there to add spice to power through the terror they inspire. So blind is the murderous fascist colossus in face of nature that he conceives of animals only as means of humiliating humans. So that's the fascists' love-hate relationship with the monkeys. That is, being a lion, he can humiliate the monkey. It's like, the joke, I love animals, they taste so good, right? This is the innocence of the predator that Nietzsche theorized, and the Nazis just drooled over it. That you kill with neither guilt nor ill intent. In the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche even gives the image of the bird of prey, that they eat the lamb, and after the lamb calls the bird evil for hunting it, the bird says, "But we love lamb." By the way, Nietzsche is also mentioned here. Adorno and Horkheimer give a quote from him. Nietzsche's unjust accusation of Schopenhauer and Voltaire that they know how to disguise their hatred of certain men and things as pity towards animals applies truly to the fascist butcher. Now that's the quote from Nietzsche comes from The Gay Science, aphorism 99. It's one of the longest aphorisms, and it's called Schopenhauer's Followers. And in it, he defends the thesis that when a superior creature meets an inferior one, the inferior one only takes the wrong and bad ideas and vices of the superior one. And that's what the disciples of Schopenhauer did according to Nietzsche. They didn't take away from him his most brilliant contributions, like his determinism, his intuitionism, or the principle of sufficient reason, his instrumentality of the intellect, or his clarity, or his resilience to accept his contradiction and defend them throughout his work. Instead, they took his Buddhist mysticism, his negation of the individual and of and of accidents, the metaphysical stuff about the will, and perhaps the biggest wrong of all, the importance of compassion and pity. Now, the disciple that he focuses on the most is Wagner, but we don't really care about that here. Just that Wagner too had a lot of compassion towards animal, which Nietzsche hated. For Nietzsche, pity is something that the weak, the decadent has. It's not an attitude for winners. And so, if from great minds, all you keep is that you need to have pity and compassion towards the weak, for Nietzsche, that's because you are weak and resentful. The weak for Nietzsche is always hateful, resentful, malevolent, whereas the strong is either indifferent or benevolent towards others. The weak for Nietzsche is someone who, like the strong, is after power. His real goal is power, but being weak, he couldn't affirm his will to power. So he tries to negate that of others. So the weak hates the strong because of that. Therefore, he will try to act as if he is virtuous, while the strong is the bad guy. And so the weak will adapt compassion to show that he is a nice guy, while the strong is the bad guy. And they will use morality, pity, and compassion for that. They will profess care and concern for the weak, so those who are like them, not out of genuine concern, but out of hate for the strong. So Schopenhauer, Wagner, and also Voltaire, since Voltaire was strictly opposed to cruelty towards animals, they were only nice to animals because, like animals, they were weak, because they too were prey. And so their compassion towards animals is actually a disguise of their hatred towards certain men and things. Now, the way Adorno and Horkheimer use that quote can have two meanings, because the fascists claim to be Nietzschean, but on the other hand, they are closer to the weak, to the slave in Nietzschean philosophy. Like the sentence that the accusation of Nietzsche that compassion is actually hatred towards the strong disguised applies to the fascist butcher means that it can be that the fascist butcher is the weaker who hates the strong, that he's the one resentful, but fascists precisely reject compassion and pity. I mean, Nietzschean criticism of fascism, where the fascists are the resentful ones and they want to humiliate others because they feel their own will to power wasn't affirmed, and so they are resentful towards others. And so that criticism is valid, and many Nietzschean philosophers made that critique. But I don't think it makes sense with everything that the Dialectic of Enlightenment been saying so far. So I think that what is correct is the second interpretation, is that fascists despise pity towards the weak, and for them to feel pity means that you are weak and resentful. Like the fascist butcher is the butcher who tends to his stock only to butcher them later. Like he loves the livestock, like the bird of prey loves the lamb. So I think this is the correct way to interpret it, because I feel that it makes more sense with what they say right after it. They say the precondition of the fascist pious love of animals, nature and children is the lust of the hunter. The idle stroking of children's hair and animal pelts signifies. This hand can destroy. It tenderly fondles one victim before felling the other, and its choice has nothing to do with the victim's guilt. The caress intimates that all are the same before power, that they have no being in themselves. For domination's bloody purpose, the creature is only material. So the butcher gives care to animals like he cares about his children. When he displays gentleness with his hand, when he pets animals, or when he strokes the hair of his kid, it is with a sinister message. I pet and stroke with the same hand that butchers and hits. My only love for you is the love of the hunter towards the prey. Don't ever forget that. And so such love is random and arbitrary. I love you because well, I just do. I love you because I do. That's just it. And I hit you only because I hit you. And so there is no rationality behind it, no reason for me to give, no justification allowed. All the talk about rationality is inherently irrational, as Nietzsche said. For him, all the philosophers were using logic and rationality for their own will to power. What matters is power, and power needs material to imprint itself on either through love or violence. It doesn't care, and as such, it doesn't select its material, since any kind of material would do. Thus the Führer flaunts his concern for innocents who are plucked out without merit, as others are killed without desert. Nature is filth. Only the devious strength which survives is in the right. So in the end, the only thing that lasts is power, the same principle that civilization claims to save humanity from. And as we said, we haven't left that state of nature. We are still balls deep in it, and fascism only unleashes it to its extremist brutality, to the point where nature is dismembering itself. So the cult of rationality is irrational because it is turning rationality into irrationality. Nature is destroying itself, dismembering itself through rationality. So the more it applies the unfettered principle of self-preservation, the more it rips itself apart. So rationality only made more apparent the irrationality of the world. It brought us to its immediate encounter, whereas the things considered irrational, like art, thought, negativity, emotions, morality, served as a medium, a way of expression. What was expressed, as we said, was the contradiction of the world. Yes, there is irrationality in this world, but with art, it found a sort of expression that allows reflection and thought. It allows sublimation so that the contradictions don't disappear and rationality goes rogue. Now that contradictions have disappeared, there's no dialectic, no exchange, no dialogue. Only might makes right. They say human beings are so radically estranged from themselves and from nature that they only know how to use and harm each other. Each is merely a factor, the subject or object of some praxis, something to be reckoned with or discounted. So just like we treat animals and nature, human beings treat themselves in the same way. The rationale is that if we treat animal with compassion, then we are sending ourselves back thousands of years into the past. We are so forced to only use and harm one another. We are forced to see each other as strictly means and never as ends. We are forced to use and mutilate bodies and flesh because it is what progress requires. To show concern for animals is considered no longer merely sentimental, but a betrayal of progress. And so this is no accident. Again, it is inherent in the concept of enlightenment. The constant rejection of superstition leads to the rejection of appearances, of mediation. We don't want to rely on appearances to interact with the world, or if we have to rely on them, we must do so with the knowledge that appearances are deceptions. When I see an object, I am not seeing it as it really is, but as it appears to me. The appearance is a mediation between me and the object. In its reality, my phone, for example, is not like I'm seeing. It's not like I'm seeing it right now. So the appearance of the phone is deceiving me somehow. Appearances, since Descartes and the rationalists, are said to be illusions. If people have believed in myths and in magic, it's because they took the world as it appears to them without going further than their immediate perception. And so according to empiricists, appearances are not to be discarded like the rationalists described. We accept that there isn't an objective reality beyond appearances, but we maintain that appearances are just illusions nonetheless, that they are lies. And so in one case you cannot trust appearances, and in the other, the only truth that can be achieved in a sea of illusions is their utility to increase your power over matter. In both cases, power remains the same goal. So the rejection of appearances, whether you are a rationalist or an empiricist, means that human beings want immediacy without the appearance, but with the real object as it is. Whatever school of thought you subscribe to, the immediacy that you are looking for will be the immediacy of power. And so that's what is beneath the appearances: pure, raw, unadulterated power. And so human beings have failed to see that it is precisely the appearances that keep themselves safe from power. That it was within appearances that thinking and reflection, as well as imagination, was possible. And so once appearances are discarded or acknowledged as nothing else but lies or illusions, reflection goes out the window as well. Human beings, having forfeited reflection, have become once more the cleverest animals, which subjugate the rest of the universe when they happen not to be tearing themselves apart. So these are the two options left. Either we tear ourselves apart, or we subjugate the rest of the world, which are the same thing if you think about it. And so in the case of animals, we have also two options left. As they say, anyone who opposes Hirst and Göring is on the side of Pavlov and vivisection. Anyone who hesitates between the two is fair game for both. Such a person is told to follow reason. So who are these guys? Well, the choice between William Randolph Hearst and Hermann Göring, or Pavlov and vivisection. So Pavlov is the father of behaviorism. He's known for his dog experiment, where he conditioned his dog into drooling whenever he hears a ring bell. And vivisection is the practice of experimenting on animals for the sake of science. Hearst was an American businessman who made a monopoly in newspapers. He was like one of the giants of the 20s and 30s, and he was known as a ruthless capitalist. He opposed the New Deal and was constantly trying to undermine union strikes. But he was an animal lover, and he owned many exotic animals, even turning his castle, because yeah, the guy owned the castle, into a zoo. But this is where we go to Göring. He was a Nazi sympathizer and admirer. Hermann Göring was one of the leading figures in the Nazi Party, and one of the Nazis that were executed after the Nuremberg trial. He was a defender of animal protection and animal rights. Yes, the Nazis were actually pretty progressive when it comes to animal rights. Göring even sent people to concentration camp for mistreating animals. And so this is another paradox of the love-hate relationship towards nature in Nazism. Hitler was, according to Goebbels, a vegetarian. They were against slaughterhouses, against vivisection, etc. So the point here is that you find yourself in a tough situation. If you oppose the Nazis and the hardcore capitalism in the persona of Hearst, then it means that you are against animal welfare. If you are against Pavlov and vivisection, then it means that you are supporting the Nazis. And so if someone says neither, they are accused of being irrational. Rationality imposes either one of the two choices. You must choose if you want to follow reason. Like, reason is pretty malleable once it's about power, and those in power decide what choices to impose on others. So it is those in power who decide what rational when rationality is following the precepts of enlightenment. The choice is obligatory and inescapable. Anyone who wants to change the world should at all costs avoid finishing up in the morass of petty rackets, while political sectarians, utopians, and anarchists go to ruin along with the spiritualists. Intellectuals whose thought is unattached to any active historical power and orients itself by neither of the poles toward which industrial society is heading lose their substance. Their thought becomes baseless. The real is the rational. Anyone who does not join in, the progressives also tell them, is of no help to anyone. Everything depends on society, and thought, no matter how precise, must align itself with the powerful social tendencies without which it becomes mere whimsy. So, all those sectarians, utopians, anarchists, spiritualists, intellectuals who don't follow the dictates of industrial society, all of them are called superstitious, dreamers, utopians, etc. I should know, I'm an anarchist myself. So the asterisk on baseless refers to a passage from the 1944 version that was taken out in 1947. There's a clause that comes after baseless, which is baseless. On this, Heidegger and Lukács agree. So it is possible that this clause was removed after the Heideggerian controversy. Like, Heidegger was a Nazi, an active member of the party, and had very troublesome anti-Semitic views in his famous Black Notebooks. So maybe it's because of that. But the other guy is Grigory Lukács. He's a Hungarian Marxist philosopher, famous for his theory of reification and for developing the concept of class consciousness in Marxism. And there is actually a book that suggests that Lukács was an influence on Heidegger's ontology, and the book is called Lukács and Heidegger by the philosopher Lucien Goldman. So if you are into Heidegger and you like Marxism, well, you should give it a read. Now, that book was published in 1973, but it didn't age well, and the thesis that Lukács' book, History and Class Consciousness, Influence, Being in Time, didn't really stand the test of time, but still an interesting read. Anyhow, so both of them, Lukács and Heidegger, agree that when thought simply follows what industrial society dictates, it loses all of its depth and substance. Heidegger was a phenomenologist, meaning that he puts emphasis on the subjective experience of Dasein. That's a term to designate the subject. I don't know, it's not really that, but let's just roll with it for now. So when the subject starts following rationality in industrial society, it means that he sacrifices his own experience in favor of technical progress. He becomes part of the they. That's the anonymous collective that pressures the subject into conforming to the prevalent ideology. So when thought doesn't follow the way of progress, it is considered completely gibberish, when in fact it is there that it can retain its authenticity. It is in resistance to the real as rational, and in its acceptance of what is concealed, mysterious, hidden, that thought has a closer relationship with truth. So the fact that Heidegger was often accused of being obscure in his writing was kind of the point. And Lukács seemed to be stating the same idea through his conception of reification of the subject, and later on through his ontology of the social subject. I'm going to complicate things if I continue on Lukács, so let's just stop the conversation here. So anyways, what Adorno and Horkheimer are getting at is this weird cult of rationality and realism. All of these who denounce superstition claim that they are realists and that they have alleged faith to reason. Anyone who challenges or doesn't follow the path of reason as they define it, receive their wrath, like the priest and the church against witches and Renaissance science. The fear of such realists is to hear the voice of nature. Their whole philosophy aims at a praxis that smashes nature to render it silent so that they can feel comfort being now out of the food chain. Yet, nature cannot be silenced. even in the inoffensive version fantasized by the fascist, a version of nature in which they rise above it and control it, is one that cannot satisfy their desires and quell their fear. So the sound of nature still rings underneath the rationalist hymns and chants. As Adorno and Horkheimer write, when its sound interrupts, even for a moment, their chanting chorus, the dread they seek to drown with their voices, and which lives on their rationalized broken hearts, as in every animal, makes itself heard. So the fascist view of nature is a view of immediacy, of intuition, one that doesn't accept appearance. It takes nature as an entity without appearances. How convenient for an ideology that seeks to dominate nature to say that nature is without appearances, to say that it doesn't have the thing that you are precisely afraid of. And so thus, a resistance against fascism is one that acknowledges the true nature of, well, nature. It is precisely what philosophy have been doing, by the way, since its beginning. Not always as good as it could have, sure, but it was doing it nonetheless. Philosophy, for most of its history, found beauty, virtue, and nobility in nature precisely in its appearances, and that gave the philosopher the drive to make theories and indulge into metaphysics. So fascism was precisely against such things. It abhors theories and metaphysics. It hates academics and intellectuals. The position that Hitler and fascists often take is one against academia. It's called anti-intellectualism. It's the idea that intellectuals, philosophers, academics have cut themselves from the real world and are in their ivory towers making bullshit theories out of their asses. And so the real Superman that the fascist promotes, based on a loose interpretation of Nietzsche, is one that is in the real world, one who doesn't need theories or anything like that, who only follows his instinct and intuition. And so he simply takes because he has the power, and he doesn't bother with further appearances. He doesn't need to make a theory and act all sophisticated with books and knowledge to make a point. He would be like, a slave. That would be like slave morality, if you focus on books and arguments. So Nietzsche himself didn't like scholars for that reason. They are for him weak, who couldn't affirm themselves in the real world. They couldn't be gangsters on the street, so they tried to have power through credentials, distorting even further nature, adding more appearances to the point of sounding completely ridicule with fancy words and far-fetched ideas. So the fascist cuts this at the root. All of this stands on the idea that nature is good and noble, and so they lay their blow at that stage. They deny that there is anything good or noble about nature. Nature is neither good and was believed as was believed by the old Romanticism, nor noble as is asserted by the new. So the point is that once nature is deprived of beauty and virtue, it simply becomes a model for immediate power. Its spectrum ranges from the power of the Führer and the power of the collective. As a model and goal, it signifies anti-intellectualism, lies bestiality. Only when apprehended as knowledge does it become the urge of the living towards peace. The consciousness which from the beginning has inspired the unerring resistance to Führer and collective. So these two entities, for the collective when it is produced by the culture industry, crush the individual. They prevent him, the collective and the Führer. They prevent him to think, to dream, to imagine, to delve into metaphysics, to believe in magic, etc. Yet Adorno and Horkheimer, for them, the things that Enlightenment casted as superstitious was precisely the obstacle to power and authoritarianism. Sure, we don't have to believe that magic is real. That's not what Adorno and Horkheimer are trying to prove. Their analysis is about the political utility of those superstitions, rather asserting whether or not they are true. Their utility is that they remind us of nature, and this is what critical theory is, after all, to remind us of nature, to keep its voice heard so that fascism doesn't take root. The book is about a warning of what can happen when we forget the cries and voices of nature because we only listen to the dictates of progress. And to conclude, what threatens the prevailing praxis and its inescapable alternatives is not nature with which that praxis coincides, but the remembrance of nature. So that's it. That's for this first fragment on humans and their relationship with animals. So as we've seen, it doesn't just it's not just about only the relationship between humans and animals, but also relationship with art, with magic, with human beings among themselves, men with women and men with men. And this first fragment is going to be the base for everything that we are going to talk about in the next videos. How men treat animals in the ideology of progress led to the discard of imagination, of thought, of reflection, etc. And this mutilation of actual bodies, of actual animals, and the regression, the reduction of mind to just another limb, to just another organ of the body, is itself going to have consequences on human beings' ability to reflect and think. And this is what we are going to talk about in the next video. We're going to look at the fragments that deal with stupidity and how cleverness can be very, very, very stupid. So that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you find it easier to read the book. And